So on the channel, we just recently talked about the likelihood of Nintendo 64 making an appearance on Nintendo Switch Online, and while that still could be in the conversation, we are getting a lot of evidence that is pointing that Nintendo may be planning something like a Game Boy Advance or Game Boy family of systems appearance on Nintendo Switch Online. And in today's video, I want to talk about where these rumors and leaks are stemming from and whether or not we can expect to maybe see this system appear between now and the heavily rumored September Nintendo Direct. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, we are talking about Game Boy Advance today and the likelihood that we may see a system like this or the family of Game Boy systems potentially show up on Nintendo Switch Online service. And you've probably seen this talked about a lot recently online, as I definitely have. And we, as I mentioned, just recently made a video on the N64 potentially coming to the Nintendo Switch Online service. And while that would still be my first choice, as I absolutely love the library of games that are with the N64, it does appear that all the hints that Nintendo is dropping lately on their Twitter account and with a lot of this Metroid Dread marketing promotional material, it does appear that it's more likely that they are planning something like a Game Boy Advance or just a Game Boy family of systems debut on the Nintendo Switch Online service. And we are definitely due for an update. That's what I want to stress one way or another. Regardless of what system we do end up seeing Nintendo eventually add into this service, we have seen them absolutely slow down the rollout of NES and SNES games, as we used to get them every month, then it went to like every quarter. Now it seems like it's every quarter, but sometimes it's like the bottom of the barrel games, or they're really just not focusing on it at all. And they really, while they do have 100+ classic titles that are really fun to play through and they are great, if you are a new Nintendo Switch Online subscriber, it makes a lot of sense for you to dive through that library. But if you've been a subscriber for a long time, such as myself, and I'm actually currently expired on my subscription, I'm sitting here waiting for a reason for Nintendo to entice me to keep it going or to renew it again. And I've had my fair share of playing through those SNES and NES classics at this point. And so it's like, I'm just sitting here waiting for something to entice me to re-sign back up. And something like a new system would absolutely do that, especially whenever you talk about, things like Nintendo finally giving Metroid the marketing and promotional material it deserves, as we typically do not see them get behind a Metroid game like this. And when I tell you guys, this has been the focal point on their Twitter and just little trailers that they've released over the last few months now since the game was actually announced. I am incredibly proud of Nintendo, and one thing that they're really focusing on, which is causing a lot of the speculation online and causing a lot of other YouTubers and content creators and just people out there that are noticing a pattern here, Nintendo is heavily focusing on the history of the previous 4 Metroid games, 2 of which you can currently play due to Nintendo Switch Online, with that being the original Metroid on the NES and Super Metroid on the SNES. But we are missing number 2 and number 4, which would be Samus Returns on the Game Boy, and then we're also missing Metroid Fusion, which is the Game Boy Advance. And then with Nintendo focusing on all of these recent tweets saying basically, here's the story arc of these previous 4 stories and how important they are to where we're headed in Metroid Dread, it causes a lot of people to speculate, is Nintendo kind of teasing the reveal ahead of time or something like a Game Boy Advance system or a Game Boy family of systems to be introduced to Nintendo Switch Online? And I do tend to believe this, as I do think that there's a lot of evidence pointing here, as I'll just read through the couple recent tweets that got a lot of people talking about this. And I do think that there could be some merit here to what Nintendo may be teasing for something like this new console edition to Nintendo Switch Online service. So just a few days back, actually on the 35th anniversary of Metroid, which I did make a 35th anniversary video on Metroid, so make sure you check that out if you haven't already on the channel. But we did have Nintendo shouting out a lot of different Metroid information, one of which was the Metroid Volume 4 Metroid Dread report, and they actually basically went over that they are detailing and will be detailing in the upcoming weeks Metroid 1 through 4. So it says, be sure to follow along the upcoming weeks as we spotlight some of the moments from the history and fun facts of the 2D Metroid saga leading up to Metroid Dread. Then just today, actually right before filming this video, they tweeted out, Metroid 2 Return of Samus released on the Nintendo Game Boy in North America in 1991. Samus is sent to Planet SR-388 to eliminate the Metroid threat, many of which have evolved into more dangerous forms. On the verge of destroying the last Metroid, a newly hatched baby hatchling, it becomes imprinted to her. We look forward to more information on the 2D Metroid saga leading up to the release of Metroid Dread on October 8th. Obviously, that's not an official confirmation by any means from Nintendo that they are for sure planning to bring these Game Boy systems to the Nintendo Switch Online. It is very interesting to see them really focus in on the importance of these games when you do not have an easy way to play them, as you would either need to play the remake of Samus Returns on the 3DS, which is definitely the better version. So if you do have that, I would encourage you guys to go through and play through that version, because even if we get the original Game Boy version ported over, it is very limited in the experience that you will have compared to something like the actual remake, the 2.5D remake that Mercury Steam actually also did, who is the same developer who is doing Metroid Dread. So that's just one side recommendation, but we have no good way to play that game outside of the 3DS or owning like an old Game Boy and maybe the Game Boy Advance player that was released on the GameCube. And that's actually how I played through a lot of my old handheld titles, as I mostly prefer to play on a TV whenever possible. Or you have to have something like a Wii U, which is still an incredible console for backwards compatibility, and the virtual console library that is on there is incredible. And I wouldn't even be upset if Nintendo just comes out with Virtual Console 2.0 and puts that on as a side service for Nintendo Switch Online. Maybe you have to be a subscriber to Nintendo Switch Online, but then you get discounted prices on the Virtual Console lineup of games. I mean, that's fine too, but give us a way to play Metroid 2 Return of Samus, and give us a way to play Metroid Fusion, and especially Fusion, because as I said, we did get the Samus Returns remake to the 3DS, and I still hope that maybe someday in the future they would look at porting that over to the Switch, just to have the definitive version on the Switch console as well. But even if they don't do that, we at least need to have a good way to play through Fusion, as a lot of the recent lore videos that have went live for Metroid Dread heavily reference the fact that this is a direct sequel to Fusion, and it could be taking place like directly after. So you need to kind of know what happens right before this game begins, and maybe they do some kind of flashback, or just kind of a run through of the history of the 2D Metroid games. But you're going to miss a lot if you do not actually experience these previous titles, and there's some great channels out there that will dive into the lore and actually really deep dive that stuff for fans that do want to know. But for the average player that might go pick up Metroid Dread when they see it launched along something like the Switch OLED on October 8th, they're not going to know the history of these previous 4 games. And what better way for Nintendo to prop up this series to be successful than to say, here's all the entire Metroid 1 through 4. It's available on your Nintendo Switch if you're a Nintendo Switch Online subscriber, and you can go pick them up now. And that's just the argument for Metroid alone. There is so many incredible franchises that got installments on the Game Boy Advance and even just the Game Boy and Game Boy Color over the course of times. This would be what Nintendo needs to get the fans excited again about this online service, and for paying for a continued active subscription, as I do think that this kind of makes sense for their future model. And I think that if they continue to add consoles at some point in time, if we got the whole Game Boy library and we got the N64 added in eventually, I wouldn't even be upset if Nintendo includes an additional pricing tier and actually charges us more than the $199 a month. I mean, when you start to look at the whole value of having all those handhelds available on your Switch, those handheld Game Boy titles, and then you also add in something like N64 in addition to the NES and SNES, well, at that point you can charge me $5.99 a month and I'll happily pay it. So I think a lot of the other Switch fans out there tend to probably agree with me on that, and I would love to know if you do, so please leave me a comment on your personal thoughts on what you'd like to see down below. But this is something that I do think could be very likely, that we could be around the corner from some kind of announcement. And like I said, there's a lot of different advanced titles that they could put out. We're about to see a new WarioWare. They could prop up that with some of the previous Wario titles that were out on the Game Boy Advance. And then you also have games like Zelda Minish Cap that would be probably amongst the top. I would say Minish Cap and Fusion are probably my 2 favorite Game Boy Advance games of all time. So I really hope we do see Minish Cap come at some point in time. I wouldn't even be upset if we don't get Minish Cap on the Game Boy Advance lineup, but maybe we actually see it fully remade, as I think that is one of the best 2D Zeldas overall that you could play through, and I really hope we do see that remastered at some point. But if we don't, and that's years off, then it would be nice to see it debut on something like a Game Boy Advance online service. Then you have some of the best like Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga games on there. You have Mario Kart Super Circuit. You have the original Advance Wars, which are upcoming on a remake, but would still be fun to go back and play the originals. Now, we are having a heavily rumored Castlevania Advance collection, but the Game Boy Advance does have some of the best Castlevania games out there. And I don't know, because that's not a first-party Nintendo, that we would ever see those come over. But, there is that possibility, and those are definitely some of the best Castlevania games. And just Metroidvania as a whole, you could argue that those are top-tier Metroidvania games that sadly, as of right now, there's just not an easy way to play them outside of emulation, as like the used market on those games is absolutely absurd. If you want to see some crazy numbers, search Castlevania Aria of Sorrow on eBay and you will see how crazy inflated these used games are getting. But you know, that's again to point out the reason why Nintendo needs to give us games like this, so we don't have to pay those crazy high inflated prices, and it entices people to continue to pay an active online subscription, which they definitely want to have as part of their overall revenue stream as a business, as we see it with companies like Microsoft that are clearly focusing on a subscription model for the whole future of gaming, as they're really betting the farm on Game Pass right now. And as much as I am a physical collector and I loved everything physical in gaming, I do, you know, acknowledge the fact that we will eventually go to an all digital future. As much as I don't want that to happen, these businesses will have to adapt and actually be able to offer us things on a subscription service, similar to how we've seen movies and music go. Because I don't know who buys CDs day one anymore when they're unreleased for new albums and artists that they have. Most people have a Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube Music subscription, and that's how we do music now, because we're so adapted to it, and we're quickly becoming that way with movies too. So games, unfortunately, is probably next up on the list, but I think that Nintendo has to get smart with how they're marketing and handling Nintendo Switch Online, and what better time to do this than now. And it could be at something like a Nintendo Direct in September. I do think that that's coming. If you look at just about every year, at least in the last 4 to 5 years, we have had a Nintendo Direct in September of some sort, whether it be a full-blown Direct or a focused Direct, kind of like Mario was last year. That all remains to be seen. I still think we're getting probably a indie Direct before the actual mainline Direct, but do they unveil this in September at the Direct, or do they just do it on a Twitter drop? Because Nintendo has been incredibly successful with doing some major announcements, just like the Switch OLED, just randomly one morning on Twitter dropping a new trailer, and then everybody talks about it and reports on it and people are excited. Nintendo has such a huge social media following now that they almost don't even have to go out of their way to include a lot of announcements in something like a Direct. So I would love to know at this point in the video, guys, all your thoughts and opinions on what you think we will see from Nintendo. Do you think this is something that they are kind of teasing and building up towards an eventual announcement of the Game Boy family of systems to be on Nintendo Switch Online? Or do you think this is simply them marketing Metroid Dread, and they have no, intention of including another system, and they're just going to continue to let the existing, NES and SNES continue to ride on this Nintendo Switch Online service? So please share all your thoughts and opinions with me in the comments down below before you do leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around this topic. Thanks so much for watching the video today, everyone. I do truly appreciate you all sticking around until the end. I do at this point in the video want to invite you all one more time to join Sunbro Nation if you haven't done so already. Do so by subscribing below, hit the like button on your way out if you enjoyed it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. That's going to do it for me, guys. I hope you all have a great day. Sunbro Nation, out.